Your husband received $800,000 for four speaking engagements, ostensibly in support of the trade deal, or by a group that supports the trade deal. You've given your own money to your campaign. Is that a conflict of interest?
I mean, and how many angels dance on the head of a pin? I have really nothing to. I mean, how do you answer that?
Originally, when the Colombian president came to the United States with the idea for Plan Colombia, it was not primarily a military plan. It was to find alternative crops, it was for economic development. But when it got to the United States, a heavy military stamp was put on it by the Pentagon. So now we have a situation where out of $1.7 billion over the next few years, 80% of it will go for military purposes.
Not a single moment was Plan Colombia discussed directly by the Colombian Congress. Major decisions were made by the executive branch and by the U.S. State Department. That was the style of the negotiation.
To give a sense of the priorities in the Congress, one of the biggest debates when Plan Colombia was debated on the floor was how many helicopters should be built in Texas at Bell Helicopter Textron, how many would be built in Connecticut at Sikorsky Helicopter. So rather than debating, is a military solution to the drug war possible, what will be the impacts on the people of Colombia, they were arguing over the money. Is the company in my state going to get it? Is the company in Texas going to get it? So it was sort of one of the less dignified moments in the American foreign policy debate. It's not so much an aid program as another way to subsidize the military-industrial complex in the United States.
Besides channeling billions of U.S. taxpayers' dollars into U.S. arms-making corporations, the State Department has resorted to sending private mercenaries instead of regular American military personnel to carry out missions in Colombia.
There are not U.S. military personnel engaged in any kind of military operations in the country. The contractor situation is an interesting one, and in many ways it's not particularly a military issue.
When you use private military contractors, you don't have the same kinds of oversight, the same kind of accountability that you have when you use GIs.
So you see that as soon as the oil production increases in Colombia, so does the U.S. military presence, with $1.3 billion supposedly devoted to fighting drugs, when we are well aware that the focus of military intervention is precisely in areas with major oil interests.
So this is a under-the-radar kind of war, a little secret war, that the United States is using its taxpayer dollars to engage in.
Engage in a policy now of aerial fumigation, which I think is a human rights violation, to put it bluntly. I mean, planes are flying up high and spraying, these dangerous chemicals, and not only on coca plants, but on legal crops. They're spraying wells where people get their water to drink. The spray is hitting, young children, babies, pregnant women.
I mean, we've been through that before, where, we use different herbicides, and, I think of Vietnam vets in Agent Orange, and everybody's told that they're fine, that there's no problem, and then later on we find that it's highly correlated to cancer or terrible illness.
Look at the children and the grandchildren of the people who were there, who were exposed. It's a horror story.
There's always been a concern in providing assistance to Colombia because they've been in effect a civil war for 30 years.
Much older than the current drug war situation, Colombia's civil strife is as old as the country itself. Originating in colonial racism and oligarchy, the social conflict develops as Colombia evolves into an industrial society, divided between a tiny rich elite and a poor working majority. While the haves and have-nots blame each other for initiating violence, it is the assassination in 1948 of a charismatic populist leader, Jorge Eliezer Gaitan, that leads to a social explosion that Colombians themselves refer to as La Violencia. With the backing of a conservative government, anti-leftist landowners and industrialists sent hordes of thugs against rioting students, workers, and peasants, forcing them to the countryside where they formed the first guerrilla movements.
In Colombia, every week, every day, there are strikes, demonstrations, roadblocks in the countryside and around cities. This is the result of a crisis, of the anguish felt by 22 million Colombians living in poverty. There are an additional 8 million Colombians who live in absolute poverty, and this gives us a total of 30 million Colombians out of a total of 40 million Colombians. Such a society is bound to generate discontent, political organizing, and social struggle.
Eduardo Estrada, a peasant, was also killed by the paramilitary groups.
About 80% of the extrajudicial killing and murdering of innocent people is now being done right now by the paramilitary.
Right now, the U.S. should be telling the Colombian military that we're not going to give them 1 penny in military assistance until they clean up their act, until they sever all ties with paramilitary groups.
There's always economic interests directly related to this military and paramilitary action against civilians. For example, we see in Colombia the most intense massacres of civilian populations happen in areas where key economic interests are at stake.
The Free Trade Agreement of the Americas is the latest attempt by the U.S. government to eliminate trade barriers and labor and environmental regulations. The intent is to open wide and large the doors of Latin America to U.S. corporations and exports. Ever since the early days of the infamous United Fruit Company, U.S. military assistance has played a major part in consolidating dictatorships more friendly to U.S. corporations than to their own populations.
Same pattern appears to be recurring in Colombia, where we are going to be working, at least indirectly through the Colombian military, with the so-called militias, who are directly connected to the major drug traffickers.
You have to know that in Colombia, all the violence and the corruption are financed by the drug traffickers. And the traditional, most corrupt political establishment is also financed by drug trafficking. The problem is that we are giving billions of dollars of U.S. assistance to a corrupt Colombian government.
While U.S. military assistance under Plan Colombia keeps pouring onto a dubious Colombian government and military, an estimated 400 billion narco dollars in solid cash are still freely moving about the world's largest financial institutions every year, without anybody apparently noticing anything.
I mean, and how many angels dance on the head of a pin? I have really nothing to. I mean, how do you answer that?